I enjoyed his brutal honesty about his own career, the sport, and even how he hates Andre Agassi. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm reviewing a book of essays called String Theory by David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace was renowned as one of the most talented, innovative writers of his time. Although in the last few years he's kind of become somewhat polarizing and there's been jokes made about him. You know, jokes about how women should watch out for red flags before dating a guy, and one of those signs, one of those red flags, is a copy of Infinite Jest on his nightstand. He's kind of become associated with this straight white male, and therefore they try to tear down his work. People have tried to kind of tear down his work or make it seem less important or not as good as it once was. You might think he's either extremely overrated or a literary genius. I tackled the monster of Infinite Jest probably 3 or 4 years ago. This was before I did book reviews, and maybe one day I will do a review of Infinite Jest, although that would require another reading and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. One thing I am certain is that David Foster Wallace makes me feel like a complete dumbass when I read him. He also makes me feel smart when I read him. I feel smart because I'm reading something a little more challenging and innovative, and sometimes I even pick up on his references, but I feel dumb reading his incredible vocabulary that leaves me just scrambling for the dictionary. And Wallace's books can be intimidating, but I would say the essays are a good place to start and a good way to ease into his writing. You'll be challenged, but you won't have to tackle a 1,000-page book like Infinite Jest. String Theory is 5 essays on the game of tennis, or how tennis is symbolic of something more than just a game. Wallace himself said he was a near-great junior tennis player, and he also played in college. So although he never went professional, he's coming from an angle where he has played the game at a higher level than most people have. The first essay, Derivative Sport in Tornado Alley, is about Wallace's junior tennis career in Philo, Illinois. In the Midwest, wind was really just a way of life, a constant companion, and also made it pretty damn hard to play tennis. The wind had a personality, temper, and an agenda, it seemed. The essay is an accounting of tennis strategies, but also digresses into facts about climate, weather patterns, mathematics, geometry, and topography. Wallace writes about how he utilized the wind and crappy tennis conditions to his advantage and beat more talented players. He, unlike everyone else, actually enjoyed playing in this wind. He could kind of harness the wind and hit these crazy shots. He also said he felt comfortable inside the tennis lines because he was used to lines, vectors, and grids of the Midwest. Which is an interesting thought. Are we more accustomed to certain things based on where we're raised? Midwest is very grid-like, lines, regimented, whereas other places like LA, kind of these jumbled messes, artistic. Maybe that's why certain people from LA are more artistic. Although I'm sure there's really no correlation. The way Wallace describes tennis with mathematics and geometry was really fascinating. If you watch a tennis match, the average viewer can see that the players are trying to hit at certain angles and utilize these angles to win points. But Wallace takes these comparisons to another level. In this essay, Wallace describes how he would utilize the wind to hit these incredible shots with crazy spin, often beating players who were much more talented than he was. His success, however, wasn't sustainable as kids began to hit puberty and grow stronger, faster, and bigger, while he was a late bloomer. His career also flatlined because as he climbed the ladder and won these tournaments, you play in more favorable conditions, or in this case less favorable for Wallace, who could no longer harness these crappy tennis conditions. The second essay is titled How Tracy Austin Broke My Heart. I've mentioned on this channel before my thoughts on memoirs, and more specifically the sports memoir. These My Story memoirs often don't deliver and are so underwhelming and disappointing that Wallace wrote an entire essay about one. They don't deliver because these athletes have these incredible lives and live these incredible stories, but their books are often delivered in a terrible, dry way. Now, not all memoirs are like this. I tend to like memoirs from musicians or actors more than sports memoirs. So the subgenre that Wallace is really dealing with is the sports memoir, or the sports autobiography. And I think I feel similar to how Wallace feels, that they're just so underwhelming, for the most part. He delves into why these memoirs, and more specifically the Tracy Austin memoir, is so disappointing. Tracy Austin was a junior tennis player who I believe won the US Open at like 16 years old or something crazy. So she had a really good career that was cut short by injuries and a freak car accident. But also these memoirs, they do incredibly well in sales. Americans revere, worship, and deify brilliant athletes. And they are brilliant, except for when they try to define their own brilliance. And I grew up reading sports biographies and memoirs, and I suppose it is good for young men to develop a love for reading, but you hope they would also move on to more challenging fiction and nonfiction. Wallace had expectations of Tracy Austin's memoir to be genius, just like her play on the court. And sadly, it did not deliver. He quotes from and comments on the insipid writing. And you've seen the post-game interviews. The banal cliche to the question of how does it feel to win the big game? Or walk us through your thought process on that game-winning home run. You'll probably hear the response like, oh, just taking it one game at a time, or I just focused on the last point. Wallace poses the question of whether these genius athletes are idiot savants or whether they are really that good at tuning everything out, turning off their thoughts, and taking it one game at a time. I think Wallace treats her fairly though, because Tracy Austin did have a ghostwriter. Maybe Wallace and us, we have these unrealistic expectations of sports stars to be able to articulate their beauty of their sport into writing. Wallace says this about genius in sports stars and how that genius doesn't always translate to writing. Real indisputable genius is so impossible to define and true techne so rarely visible, much less televisible, that maybe we automatically expect people who are geniuses as athletes to be geniuses also as speakers and writers, to be articulate, perceptive, truthful, profound. If it's just that we naively expect geniuses in motion to be also geniuses in reflection, then their failure to be that shouldn't really seem any crueler or more disillusioning than Kant's glass jaw or Eliot's inability to hit the curve. And as I've gotten older, these memoirs that I used to really enjoy when I was younger, I still enjoy, but like Wallace, I do find them a little disappointing. But there is also something endearing to see them humanized. It would be unfair or even cruel to say, if Rob Gronkowski could catch those touchdown passes, have that girlfriend, and also write like Ernest Hemingway. These athletes spent their entire lives honing their craft, and it wasn't writing. Before I get to the rest of my review, please hit that like button. It would get this video out to more people like you who would enjoy it. I would really appreciate it. Now back to the review. The next two essays were on a tennis player, Michael Joyce, and the other essay was about the US Open. They are both interesting as Wallace makes keen observations on the sport and society. My one dislike was he often describes in excruciatingly detail the environment of the tournaments down to what's on the concessions menu and the color of the bleachers. He makes sure the reader will understand, almost to a fault, the makeup and every detail of a tennis tournament, from the qualifiers all the way to the concession stands. I think in this aspect, less would have been more, and I think the average American understands the sports tournament more or less. And the best essay in this book, in my opinion, is the last essay on the great Swiss tennis player Roger Federer. This was the first essay I read years back when a friend sent it to me, and upon a reread and reading the other essays, this one is still my favorite. The article is about experiencing Roger Federer play, just watching the beauty of it all. It's more emotional and less matter-of-fact like the other essays. It describes the beauty of the sport and the beauty of tennis. It tackles the cliche that seeing someone as good as Roger Federer is a religious experience, but Wallace explains just how it is. This present article is more about a spectator's experience of Federer and its context. The specific thesis here is that if you've never seen the young man play live and then do in person on the sacred grass of Wimbledon through the literally withering heat and then wind and rain of the '06 fortnight, then you are apt to have what one of the tournament's press bus drivers describes as a bloody near religious experience. It may be tempting at first to hear a phrase like this as just one more of the overheated tropes that people resort to as they try to describe the feeling of Federer moments. But the driver's phrase turns out to be true, literally, for an instant ecstatically, though it takes some time and serious watching to see this truth emerge. So that was my review of String Theory by David Foster Wallace, the collection of 5 essays. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed his brutal honesty about his own career, the sport, and even how he hates Andre Agassi. So he's a very truthful writer, and he brings new insights into the game of tennis. And if anything, definitely check out the essay on Roger Federer. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, comment, let me know what you thought, hit that subscribe button. I post these videos pretty regularly. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed my review on String Theory by David Foster Wallace.